Hello.
Hi. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Today, we have Tonya from Illegal Aid Justice Center. She is an organizer. And we're going to be talking about what an issue that's actually known but is not really talked about here, and that's farm workers. Farm workers. Who are they? Where are they? And what are we doing to protect them? Right. So I want to pass it down to Tonya. Tonya, can you tell us a little bit about you and your work and what led you to this particular issue?
Okay. My name's Tonya Osinkosky, and for a Polish last name, I speak Spanish. I don't speak Polish except for maybe 5 words, but I come from a family of immigrants. So I remember growing up hearing my grandparents who were first generation in this country. So I think that really came to bear on some of my interest in immigrant rights is that connection with my family as well. I work as a community organizer with migrant farm workers across the state of Virginia. And every summer for about the past 4 summers, I've spent on the eastern shore of Virginia, which is that part below Maryland. I think people know about the Maryland side, but as you get down into that peninsula area and as you cross that bridge going 14 miles out across the bay, there are a lot of agricultural workers in that area. And so I've lived out there, done organizing. We've just hired a full-time organizer who lives on Eastern Shore now. And my call to the work. So I had a friend call me when I was, I'll go back that I'm actually a pastor's kid on both sides. Both of my parents are retired pastors. And so I think I kind of grew up with a background in community organizing, but from church planning. And so that was a skill that I kind of watched in a different realm. But I had a chance, somebody called me, a friend of mine from college said, let's go pick blueberries. And so we ended up living on a large labor camp up in Maine, and I was picking blueberries one summer after I was out of college. And that was very eye-opening for me, backbreaking work. And interesting work as I talked with people. And also, I think the other thing is that my ex-husband is from Guatemala. And when he came to the country, his first job was working in an orchard, picking apples in the Shenandoah Valley. And after that, he transitioned into working in a poultry plant. And so we do a lot of work with both, not just with migrant farm workers, but also the other aspects of agricultural work like poultry. We were involved in the new laws that came out on COVID for worker protections for COVID-19. So I think that's those experiences have helped shaped. And having lived in both Bolivia and Guatemala and with and working in agriculture alongside my family in Guatemala too. So,
wow, thank you for sharing that with us. And so, can you share with us as well as what are the things that you have seen in the Eastern Shore? You are in the grounds with the farm workers, so I'm assuming you tend to see a lot of obstacles, a lot of suppression for these type of workers. So I don't know if you are comfortable sharing maybe some things that you have seen or some stories from your work.
Sure. I think like the first thing that workers generally approach on wanting some help is on health. And so migrant farm workers are generally entitled to workers' comp, but it's not something that all employers put in for. And so it's, I think of myself that I didn't even know how workers' comp worked until I needed it as, working here in the United States and in Virginia. And so navigating people through that. But there are other things that are, workers' comp is not incredibly strong sometimes. And so, and if people don't know about their rights, sometimes they don't access it, right? But also there are other situations where maybe it's not quite seen, like in heat stress, right? That even though it might have happened from heat stress, it's reported a day later, and the way it's reported, the connection isn't always made or intentionally not made. And so, like, one of the stories I think of is that there was somebody last year who had gotten sick from heat stress, if I remember correctly. And this is passed down through other workers. He came back, he had a huge hospital bill, and he ended up, I didn't know about it. He ended up coming back this past year to pay off his bill. And so that was cutting in, like most of the workers that I know, for 10 months out of the year, they're not making more than $14,000 a year. And I know that we hear, oh, well, that's really great money in Mexico, which it is, right? But it's backbreaking work. But he came to be able to pay off a bill that, didn't know about access to financial aid. That's a huge chunk of money that he was hoping to be able to give to his family, and ended up going to pay a bill. And so, and people are worried about that, because not only is it huge bills, but it prevents, if you get into a bad accident or have health issues, that prevents you for the rest of your life for being able to provide for your family, right? So those are some of the things. I also, I'm just going to pull up, I love to collect the words of migrant farm workers to tell their story the best rather than relay them. So I'm going to read two quotes that I took from farm workers. And one of them is from a family that I met this year. And her quote is, "I've been moving to follow the harvest for 20 years. Before I worked, but now that my husband and I have 2 children, I stay at home with them in the labor camp. My husband earns $8 a day for the harvest. We have to measure it out over food, telephone, and gasoline costs. We have to tie our hands to not spend the money. The children need things, and we need to help our parents. We aren't here because we were born alone. We always need to take care of our families. My dream for my family is to live in one place and to buy a house. If that was possible with this wage, we would have achieved it a long time ago, but it's impossible with $8 an hour." And I'm just going to tie that directly into one of the bills that we are looking at this year. Last year, in January of this year, we introduced something to remove the minimum wage exemption for farm workers, which is based in our past of exploiting enslaved peoples, right? So while thankfully we're going to have $15 an hour. I think it's, 2024, right? That our minimum wage in Virginia is going up. Agricultural workers are cut out of that. And so we're looking at people who are living paycheck to paycheck and without that opportunity. So we're reintroducing it again when we really need the voices of our faith leaders and our congregations to speak towards that, to that, right? I want to read one other quote here, unless you have a question there, Yanet. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Their words are really important right now.
Okay. And this goes to another bill that we're introducing, and we introduced last year, but it was tabled to this year, which is on heat stress. And actually, I want to express that the things that have come from workers, we do it through community organizing. We had worker meetings, and these were the 2 top things: was pay, work, like the rate of production, that, how people have to meet a production standard, and then also heat stress, because it's incredibly hot. And I think people, because a lot of us, like when I worked in a grocery store, every 2 hours I got a 10-minute break, but that is not mandatory, and it's not mandatory for agricultural workers. So I want to read this that I collected last year. "The supervisors want us to pick 18 to 19 buckets of tomatoes an hour. It's too much. We only get 1 break to eat during the day for lunch. Our bodies can't take 6 to 7 hours at that pace without eating, let alone every day in the hot sun. They are slaving us. We need at least 5 minutes to rest. But they put us on a list if we don't meet the production standard. They tell us there are a lot of other people from Mexico who will come to fill this job.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I think before I move on, I want to kind of highlight two things that you said. These farm workers are seasonal workers that come here for only 10 months. Right. That their average annual income is $14,000 a year, and I want to, highlight that for folks that are watching us, because, that tends, that information we don't know, some of us don't know where our food is coming from and who's picking our food, right? So, one other question that people might be asking right now is, how are these farm workers coming, And I was wondering if you can explain that to our viewers, how are they coming? How are, why Virginia? So if that's something you can explain to us.
Sure. So there are different avenues in which people come. There are people who live here in the United States, whether documented or undocumented, who follow the season. So they might start in Florida and then come to the Carolinas and then up to Virginia and back to Florida again. And there are different migrant streams. People who are coming to pick apples may have a different path that they take. But I'm talking about Eastern Shore right now. And besides tomatoes on Eastern Shore, potatoes are another crop, and there are other types of agricultural as well. And then you have H-2A workers, which we're seeing more and more. And H-2A is the guest worker program. There's an unlimited, people can apply, businesses can apply. They have to offer it to U.S. workers first, but there are very few people who want to do backbreaking work for that kind of pay. And it's supposed to be competitive, offering it at a reasonable wage that American workers would want to take those jobs. But that's not the case, right? And so they offer this visa to people generally from Mexico who will come up like anywhere from 3 months up to 10 months of the year, and then they return. But they're tied to one employer, and the H-2 programs are a little fraught in that way because you are tied to one employer, which means if you speak up about issues that are concerning you, you can get blacklisted and you just won't be brought back the next year. Or in some cases, we've seen in different parts of the state, if you speak up and you and family members or community members from your community, if you speak up, there's a possibility that your whole community won't be brought back. Because as the worker who said, there's 100 other people who could we'll just go to another place in Mexico and offer that job there. So it's fraught, right? Even though the what they call the adverse effect wage rate is $12.67 an hour. And you think, oh, well, that's good. They should be making more than $14,000. But if you're at the whims of weather, right? And so there's only a guarantee for 3/4 of that amount. So even if you're offered 36 hours, what they call the 3/4 guarantee only requires 3/4 of that, which is why you see people like, yes, that's a good wage in Mexico. But even there, people say that, you'd think that the cost of living is so much lower there, but food costs tend to be elevated there as well, right? So,
yeah, that's definitely true. I am from Mexico and we're from Puebla. And so just an example is that usually in Mexico, the cheapest part of the chicken is like the insides. And that is even like now really costly for families that don't make a livable wage. So that is even, that's alarming, right? And so, so I wanted to tie down and make sure the folks know that, farm workers' rights is not just an immigrant issue. It's also an environmental issue, as Tonya mentioned, that he stressed is really important for farm workers, and as well as workers' rights is tied down to farm workers. So there's a bunch of intersectionality between this issue, and it's really important. And so now that, even though Tanya mentioned a little bit about the bills that we are going to move forward in this General Assembly, we can maybe go in a little bit more deeper into each of them. And so you mentioned that farm workers wanted you to remove the minimum wage exemption because they're not getting paid livable wages. So to our viewers, what is something that you could maybe explain in one sentence what it is and what they can do?
Okay. So to reiterate some of this, is that it is based on the fact that people who are not entitled to it generally were African-American workers in this country. And so we have continued that legacy of racism in this state because there's a strong agribusiness lobby, right? And so we need to look at in this age of the advocacy that we're doing for Black Lives Matter, and realizing that it is that there are immigrant workers who have taken over a lot of those jobs and who are still living with those remnants of racism in this country. And so what we're asking is that the minimum wage exemption is removed so that farm workers are also entitled to the benefits of what everybody else is. Because if not, we will continue to see people who are working in dairy. I know people who work in dairy who make $9 an hour, who are not entitled to overtime. That's a whole other issue. And continue as the rest of us are looking at a livable wage and knowing that these are our essential workers. Like we uplift in our feeds about we got to protect our essential workers, but we're not protecting our essential workers when we keep subjecting them to such incredibly minimum wages, right? Not even the minimum wage, right? Yeah. Yep. So that's what we're asking. And what you can do, so you see that we have Justice for All there. I think we're going to be putting up our Facebook, Legal Aid Justice Center. So when there is a call to action for specific legislators, you can sign the petition. We're going to have all of our bills up there. And as we get closer to General Assembly, you can do that. I would say the other thing is if you care about, and the thing is that wherever you live, there are agricultural workers. Even in urban areas, we have H-2B workers, which is the non-agricultural guest worker visa, who are working in landscaping or lifeguarding or selling ice cream and who are subjected to exploitation. And so if you are interested, get in touch with us. And everybody has a different skill set, whether yours is research or you want to be on the ground visiting people. Get in touch with us, send me an email, and we will look, even in this time of the pandemic, how we can connect you into your communities. And we also have a Facebook site that is bilingual that you can connect to that as well.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I want to highlight two things that you mentioned, H-2A visas and H-2B visas. And this is really important, I think, for folks to kind of understand, because it's a little bit confusing even for me at the beginning. And so H-2A visas are the guest workers program and under where farm workers are, right? And then you have the H-2B visas, which are where landscapers, construction workers, and you said, I didn't even know ice cream workers were under that program either. So that's, but what is the difference between those two type of visas?
So one is for agriculture, the H-2A, and it's pretty wide open for for employers to apply for that. H-2B is limited, and it's for non-agricultural workers. And truth be told, for landscaping and construction, you would think that people who live in the United States in the time of a pandemic where we have unemployment, that people would be interested. But we do see employers who kind of skirt around that and still apply to try to get workers coming, because it's well, they're saying that they can't find people, but I don't believe that is the truth, right? Maybe for agriculture. But if you're not finding people, then you're not paying the correct wages, and you're not giving the benefits that you need to give and the treatment that,
Yeah, no, you are totally correct. And so, for BICCP, there's different actions that y'all can also take, which is signing our petition that is up in our website, as well as engaging your legislators into this issue, and addressing and educating yourself. I think one of the most important part about jumping or having the passion into an issue is educating what is happening and what is going on, right? And so I want to share before we move on that we will have a Farmworkers 101 in December 21st, along with Tonya, and we're going to go more in depth into the history of farm workers and basically the intersectionality within, Black farm workers, Filipino farm workers, Latinx farm workers, women farm workers, that we tend to, have these conversations, but we forget that they are there. And that's really important to uplift. And as well as addressing I mentioned before, addressing that there is also an intersectionality within the environmental justice, within workers' rights, immigration justice. And I think for this, like Tonya mentioned, where is our food supply chain coming from? Where is our food? And is that a fair, I guess like a fair table that you're sitting at, right? And so in that I want to move on to addressing the heat stress. I think a lot of, like you mentioned before, folks are not required, or employers are not required to give breaks to their employees. And that doesn't only affect to just farm workers. It affects any outdoor worker or indoor worker that is being exposed to high temperatures. And so I think this brings to the point and an idea that when you center the most marginalized people, everybody tends to benefit from what we fight, right? So, and I do want to also share that BICCP is also working on another issue that, unfortunately, we won't be able to fight in the General Assembly this session because of the limited bills. But currently, there is children working on tobacco fields that are under the age of 18. And so we are trying to pass a legislation that would require parental or legal guardian permission, and as well as informing them of the issues or obstacles that they can face while working in those fields. And so, but we will continue to educate folks throughout the next year, and hopefully we'll be back with the legislation on 2022. So, which probably seems far away, but it's not. So, anyways, Tonya, I think as a person of faith that you mentioned, can you share with us why you think this work, ties down to, our faith values, and how you as a faith person think this is it's just that this work needs to be done?
as a young person, I remember one of my favorite books, and I'm sure in all faith traditions, justice is pivotal, right? But I remember reading the book of Isaiah as a young person, and thinking, wow, and then starting to see it all through, right? Scripture is that our faith needs to be lived out here. It has to be put into practice here. And I think, I think for the time that I've lived in Latin America, how much I've been enriched by the faith traditions in Latin America, diverse faith traditions in Latin America. And having those conversations and realizing that without sounding trite, that we really are brothers and sisters. And so we need to, some of the most beautiful things, I'm sitting with this question because it's so important to me. But some of the most beautiful things on Eastern Shore are the worker meetings, which we didn't have during the pandemic and we missed having. But we met at a church, and community members and farm workers came and sat together. And it was the breaking of bread, like the most powerful things during those meetings. Sometimes, it was very powerful to hear people talk about their experiences, but sitting around the tables and having an interpreter at each table and hearing, like as I went around and I was kind of overhearing what was happening in tables, that's where the connection happened, is that people really start to realize when you have that opportunity to sit down together that we are so much alike in our lived experiences as humans. And when you make that connection, and it's not just the things that you're hearing on the news, but it's that human connection, you can't turn away because you start to see people as part of your extended family.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important. One thing about, I can speak for my folks, like, we being Mexican, sharing our food is a type of love language, sitting down at the table, that's our love language, and so that's really important to highlight. And so we have come to an end of our show, but I want to give you another minute to say any last words before we end. Tonya?
Yeah, reach out to us. Go in your community. There are migrant and agricultural workers, and whether they be landscapers or whatever they're doing, reach out to us, reach out to people who are connecting, because the thing that I hear from migrant workers and agricultural workers, especially who are migrant, is that we feel isolated, and when people come to our country, we receive with open arms. And that's not the experience of people coming here. They're hidden in plain sight. And a lot of times they're going to work, coming home, and they want to connect. They want to learn English. They want to interact and have a real experience here in the United States. And so find out who's connecting in your communities. And if not, contact us and we will help you connect.
Yes, I think sorry, we're having technical difficulties. But I think that's a very important point that you highlight. I think one of the our privileges is that we know all of these resources. And like you said, these workers are just down the street from us and we don't even know, but it's so important to distribute all of these resources, information everywhere in order for them, to know this. And so with that being said, please don't forget to sign up for our Farm Workers 101. We go more in depth onto what is going on here, and of course, give you even more space to ask more questions and what you can do. So our link is up in the comments, and so please share it with your friends, anybody, and as well as don't forget to sign our petition. And if you cannot make it this December to our Farm Workers 101, we will be having a mini workshop on farm workers on our Day for All People in January. Well, it's actually Week for All People. Oh no, Day for All Week. So instead of one day, it's going to be a whole week. So sorry, we're so used to just having Day for All People one day, and Tonya will also be joining us, and we will also be talking about and getting, gearing up to the General Assembly and making sure that everybody, takes this to their legislators. So again, thank you so much, Tonya, for joining us, for taking your time with us, and we look forward for you coming back to the show next time. Thank you.
Thank you.